Hello, this is Bill Rogers Sunday School class. We are studying the Gospel of John, and today we're in chapter 7. We have, over the few weeks that we've been involved here, 9 or 10 weeks, I think, we have noted that often when people are totally unfamiliar with the Bible, a good starting place for them to start reading is the Gospel of John, and then go and catch the other Gospels. John is different from the others. The others, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the synoptic gospels, but John has more indications of chronology, and it's from the Gospel of John that we get the notion that Jesus' public ministry lasted 3.5 years. Now, the speed with which we have to move through the book is a bit frustrating, but we cannot take this thing verse by verse. There's just not enough time for that. So we are going to skip over, but I wanted to read in chapter 7 up to where the actual lesson starts today. Another observation I have coming through this, the Gospel of John this time, I've taught it before in this Sunday school series. The other thing is the fact that, oh my, is that there are things where I have really never understood what's going on. And today's lesson, there's some back and forth and conversations, and it's been very helpful for me to have the teaching materials. And so let's just jump in and we'll make some comments as we go. Now, I'm having an uncooperative mouse today. All right. So John chapter 7, verse 1, after these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. That's the Jewish religious leaders were seeking to kill him. And then it says, now the feast of the Jews, the feast of booths, was near. To understand what is going to happen in the broader sweep of the chapter, the Feast of Booths was an annual celebration around harvest that had everybody would basically go camping. They would build little brush arbors, and the family would sleep out at night in them to remember how God delivered them in the wilderness, 40 years in the wilderness. But, and again, I apologize for my crew. But John is documenting the opposition that is coming from the religious leaders, that now they are actually plotting to kill Jesus. So Jesus is going to go down to Jerusalem. So verse 3, his brothers said to him, leave here and go into Judea so that your disciples also may see your works which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for not even his brothers were believing in him. So Jesus said to them, my time is not yet come. And that's a phrase that John repeats. My time is not yet here, or my time is not yet come, but your time is always opportune. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its deeds are evil. Now, we've got to kind of take a little side note here. God so loved the world, which means the people of the world, but other times in the New Testament, the world means that evil world system that opposes the ministry of Christ and his kingdom. And so Jesus, speaking to his brothers, says the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its deeds are evil. Verse 8, go up to the feast yourselves. I do not go up to this feast because my time has not yet fully come. Having said these things to them, he stayed there in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up to the feast, he then himself also went up, not publicly, but as if in secret. So verse 11, the Jews were seeking him at the feast and were saying, where is he? There was much grumbling among the crowds concerning him. Some were saying he's a good man. Others were saying, no, on the contrary, he leads people astray. So Jesus at this point is very controversial, yet no one was speaking openly of him for fear of the Jews. And John is using the Jews for the Jewish religious leaders at this point, which would be the Pharisees and the Sadducees together. That's his terminology for it. Now, I'm again The mouse is not cooperating with me. Let's see what happens here. All right, verse 14. But when it was now the midst of the feast. Now, in the middle of this feast, the priest would go and get a golden pitcher full of water and take it back and pour it on the altar. That was part of the celebration. So at the end of the chapter, Jesus says, I'm the water of life. So that part of the religious festival is significant. He is making a claim that this feast is pointing to me. So he's teaching in the temple. Verse 15, the Jews then were astonished, saying, wait a minute. And this is where today's passage begins. The Jews then were astonished, saying, how has this man become so learned, having never been educated? So he is apparently an astonishing teacher. And at the end of this chapter, some guys are sent to, arrest Jesus, and they have to stop and say, nobody ever spoke like this. Folks, I'm going to have to stop for just a minute. They would have traveling teachers. I think of it as like graduate school, where they would have a teaching rabbi, and a young man would associate himself with that rabbi and, quote, sit at the feet of the rabbi. And the teaching style was very much question and answer. So they had not seen Jesus associate himself with any other rabbi. So they're saying, wait a minute, how's this guy know so much? And Jesus is going to answer them this way. My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. So they're immediately going to say, wait, who sent this guy? He's been somewhere else. He's been with a teacher, and the person that sent him is the teacher, and we don't recognize who his teacher was. We don't recognize anything else. And then Jesus says something that to me has a tremendous amount of depth here. And it's also very problematic for anybody trying to study the Bible on their own. So Jesus answered them and said, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone is willing to do his will, he will know of the teaching, whether it is of God or whether I speak from myself. So he is predicating the proper interpretation of what Jesus is saying to the submission of the will to the one who sent him. And he is not clearly stating, God sent me and this is God's message to you. Now, we know in retrospect that that's what it is, but they are going to hear this and be somewhat confused. Now, we have... let's think about what went wrong with the way they were approaching things. You've got the Sadducees, who were a more politically aligned religious party, and they did not believe in life after death. So that was one group. And then the Pharisees were very highly respected, but there were not a lot of them. Nicodemus was a Pharisee. They had on the Sanhedrin, the council, there were both Sadducees and Pharisees, and they were somewhat in opposition to each other. And my friend Adam Sacitano was reading a book on the history of right before the New Testament, and by F.F. Bruce, and he points out, Bruce says, Judaism leading up to the time of Jesus was much more varied than the Judaism that we have inherited after the destruction of the temple. But Jesus is saying, if you're not willing to submit yourself to my Father, you're not going to understand and properly interpret the kind of things I'm saying. It's going to be puzzling to you. All we're going to have is debate. And I was thinking an interesting statement I encountered from a man who said the most significant thing that happened to him in seminary was a professor. He said, I want to point out a flaw in your thinking. You are reading this as though it only applies to other people. So I'm God's guy. I'm speaking into the situation, and here's where you're wrong and I'm right. And that's the wrong way to approach this. Instead, you have to take the teachings of Jesus, and before you go hitting somebody else on the head with your big coffee table Bible, or, however you approach religious conversations, you have to look at, am I doing anything that falls over on this category, excuse me, of things that Jesus is rebuking them for? Well, let's go back to our passage. Here we are. My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone is willing to do his will, he will know of the teaching, whether it is from God or belonging to God or not, or whether I speak from myself, from something I've invented and thought up myself. But instead, verse 18, he says, he who speaks from himself, oh, I do not understand why I'm having such difficulty with the mouse today. Okay, where were we? He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory. When you're making stuff up out of your head, you're trying to promote yourself. And that is a natural human assertion. But he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, and there's no unrighteousness in him. So Jesus is speaking of himself, but then we can apply, if our goal is, if we are purifying our motive to seek the glory of God the Father, then we move into the correct place for interpreting what Jesus has to say. And then we are going to say, I apply this first to myself. I look at my motives. I look at where I'm speaking from, and we go from there. I will remind you of the encounter. Jesus was trying to go through Samaria, and the Samaritans blocked them, and the disciples said, hey, should we call down fire on these people? They were righteous indignation. This is the most important person in the world, and you're stopping him from what he wants to do. And Jesus says, no, you don't understand the spirit that's motivating you right now when you do that. So, but Jesus is claiming to be true with no unrighteousness there in verse 18. Now, this is where interpretation gets tricky. And I had not seen, literally every word and phrase in the Gospels has been examined and re-examined. Verse 19 says, did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law? Why do you seek to kill me? You got to go back a couple of chapters where Jesus healed on the Sabbath. And that started, according to John, that started the plots against him. They immediately said, we are right. We are the Pharisees. We're totally dedicated to God. We take every little dot in the law, every comma, every apostrophe. It's all very important to us. We have no deviation from what we have decided the proper interpretation is. And when they encounter Jesus healing on the Sabbath, they plot to kill. So Jesus is kind of in a left-handed way saying, when the Pharisees or the religious leaders or the Sadducees decided to kill Jesus because he had deviated from their doctrinal purity, they were committing murder and breaking the law. Now, in more than one place in the gospel, he points out they're really scrupulous about the details, but they have walked away from the heart of what's going on here, where God wanted a people who were like him and able to reach out to the lost people of the world. So the crowd responds, you have a demon who seeks to kill you. My read of this has been, and there are others, is where we would say, you're nuts today. They say you're demon possessed. Now, it may be they really thought he was demon possessed, or that was their only model for mental illness, or you're not thinking right. Who's trying to kill you? And Jesus answered, I did one deed and you all marveled. Okay, that was healing the man on the Sabbath. For this reason, now here's what he's going to argue from scriptures. Moses has given you circumcision, and it actually was given to Abraham. as part of the Abrahamic covenant, and Moses reiterates it in the law that the Israelites had as they left Egypt. And he says, listen, if a baby boy gets to be 8 days old and it falls on the Sabbath, they have said, hey, it's okay to do the circumcision rite on that baby, because the 8th day is when it has to be done. And so he says, you circumcise a man, it would actually be a baby boy for the most part, every once in a while, a proselyte, an adult proselyte would become Jewish and they would circumcise him. But you said you don't have any problems with doing this on the Sabbath. And they actually had written that out. They had debated it and they said, okay, this is so important. We make this one exception for, quote, work on the Sabbath. And so he's pointing out, hey, you've got an exception because you think it's reasonable to do this. So if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses will not be broken, why are you angry with me because I made an entire human being well on the Sabbath? They were ready to kill him for it. He says, don't judge with externals or appearance or the outside things, but judge with righteous judgment, the way God looks at things, righteous judgment. Okay, at this point, this is where you kind of have to go back and forth. So some of the people of Jerusalem at this point, now, first the crowd responds, you're nuts, you're demon possessed, nobody's trying to kill you. And some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, wait, isn't this the man that they're trying to kill? They really are trying to kill him. He's telling the truth. Look, he's speaking publicly and they're saying nothing to him. So they're saying, wait, what's going on? Now, the next question may be sarcastic, or it may be a legitimate question. I don't know. John doesn't give us much in the way of clues, and your interpretation of this may very well be a result of your personal history. But he says the rulers do not really know that this is the Christ, do they? That could be sarcasm. They're saying, they are trying to kill this guy. So the rulers have decided nobody's trying to kill him today. Maybe he's there. They've decided he's the Messiah. Or they are saying, wait, maybe he really is, because they're leaving him alone now. So either way, he is legitimate. However, here's what they're going to say. We know where this man is from, but whenever the Christ may come, no one knows where he is from. Now, the writer of the Epistle to the Hebrews compares Jesus to Melchizedek in that, in a sense, nobody knew where such a thing could come from. There is no educational history that would match up with their expectations for a religious leader. He wasn't educated in this school and trained in this other school and graduated from this other school, nothing like that. So they're saying nobody knows where he's from. And also there may be a hint in here. They're thinking he's from Nazareth, where the prophecy is that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. And you have to go to Luke's gospel and so forth to find he actually was born in Bethlehem. And then the family moved. They went to Egypt to get away from Herod, and then they come back to Nazareth, which is where Joseph and Mary had been before they responded to the census and the baby was born. But here they're saying when the Messiah comes, no one knows where he's from. And that's kind of a puzzling thing, because they're thinking, some of the other people would have said, no, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. But at this point, Jesus, if you can imagine Jesus in one of the courts around the temple where the traveling teachers would stand and teach people at various festivals and holidays and times of sacrifice, Jesus cried out in the temple teaching and saying, you both know me and you know where I'm from. I have not come out of my own initiative, but the one who sent me is true. And that's the one you don't know. You don't know God the Father. Then Jesus makes a dramatic claim. I know him because I'm from him. And he sent me. So at this point, they're seeking to seize him, and nobody laid hands on him, though, because his hour had not yet come. as John has noted. But many of the crowd at this point now believe in him, become his followers. They trust in him. And they're saying, when the Christ comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has. Will he? Now, that's the end of today's passage. But the Pharisees send probably the temple guard, the officers, to seize him. And Jesus is speaking. And there's a little bit more we won't go into. And there's speculation, is he leaving this country and going to go teach the rest of the Mediterranean region? But verse 37 is what I wanted to point out in the context of the Festival of Booths. Now, on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. So as we're kind of accumulating a list of things that are equivalent to being saved, to salvation, eternal life, entering the kingdom of God, here is another one, is that something so intensely radical should occur in your life when you come to Jesus. This radical change should occur, so that from your innermost being is that water that Jesus talked about to the woman at the well in chapter 4, which is 3 chapters back. So, and he's talking also of the giving of the Holy Spirit, and he will cover that again in chapter 14, 15, and 16, and so forth. All right, so that's today's passage, and we're going to stop now and have a little discussion. We're going to open the mics and let you interject questions, comments, observations, even corrections if I've said something wrong. What you got for us? Anybody got an observation?
I'm thinking that the Pharisees, Sadducees, the whole Jewish leadership became so rules oriented that even if they believed Jesus was the Messiah, if they spoke out, they too would be killed. So it's kind of the I don't know how to say this. Privately, they're saying one thing, publicly they may be saying the other. Therefore, it's like he needs to be arrested, but nobody wants to be the one to do it.
Yeah, and they also are admitting the power of his words. Nobody else ever before spoke with authority like this, and could pierce right to the very center of the discussion with a question. Dennis, I noticed you have unmuted. What you got?
I think that they really would have took him that day. I think they're sort of ashamed to do it in such a public way. They were planning on doing it at night, if you remember correctly.
Yeah.
They had a long plan that I knew that, I believe that Jesus knew that he was going to have such a confrontation that day. And he needed to go to that exact spot. That was in the Father's plan for him to go to that exact spot. It's like sort of hitting the nail on the head. He needed to do that. And they said one part to where that they didn't believe him. Of course, they're going to come up with all kinds of excuses, that they was confused exactly about where he was born. And the Messiah was supposed to come from another, from Bethlehem. And they couldn't put that puzzle together. But I simply believe that that room was full of anger, and it was full of resentment, and they really wanted to tear him apart.
Yeah.
But they would not do it in front of so many witnesses. And they knew that the more he talked, the more proof they got to back up their scheme. Because he said a lot of stuff as time went on to build their case. Even though he was truthful and innocent.
And they could not, I mean, Nicodemus comes in and says, nobody can do the works you do unless they're from God. So there's always already this growing recognition of those things. Bart, do you have, before you have to log off, do you have any insights for us? He may be in motion, not able to talk to us. All right, Sally, do you have anything? Well, Emily, do you have any insight on this passage?
Not any insight, but when I continued to read on to verse 39, and I read, because Jesus had not yet been glorified. Ooh, I sat back for a minute.
Yeah.
And I had to get further reading to understand what that meant. That he had not yet been crucified.
Crucified and resurrected, yeah.
Yeah.
And ascended to
That's what-
heaven.
That's what the glorified referred to.
Okay. Sally, what do you have for us?
Oh, when Jesus referred to circumcision, I never had connected that it's done for healing and for health reasons even today. And why would they criticize him? Because he understood the big picture. This was given to you for health reasons, and I healed on the Sabbath. So you shouldn't criticize.
And they really were trying to kill Jesus. Now, it's a little bit of a puzzle where his brothers want him to go up to Jerusalem, saying, okay, if you want exposure, you better go. And he says, my time is not yet. And then he goes in secret. And that's a little bit of a puzzle in the way they're approaching things. But he had controversy with his family. Anybody ever heard anything about that might be helpful?
Jesus healed with words, and they had to do that circumcision by a physical action.
Okay.
It looks like that that Jesus really had them over a barrel right there, and that simply just made them that much angrier. They wasn't going to accept that anything that he said, really.
Okay. They were going to find something to pick at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also think that Jesus, when he said his time wasn't yet, he knew that eventually in Jerusalem they would attack him and capture him. And that wasn't the time just yet for the crucifixion to happen. But his family always tried, but they didn't truly understand the whole picture.
Okay. Well, okay. I think it's going to be time to log off here and let you go to your next task. But I thank you very much for participating and paying attention. And